Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Gonzalez. Thank you so much for joining today. We are so excited to be able to help spotlight one of our master teachers and how she uses our platform for her ELL students. Um, to begin, would love to just give a quick introduction. My name is Diana Gonzalez. I am pictured over here on the right. I am based out of Austin, Texas, and part of the customer success team here at NoRedInk. Prior to moving into the EdTech space, I was a bilingual teacher as well as a dual language teacher here in the Austin area. So ELLs are definitely something that are very near and dear to my heart. Joining me today as our master teacher is Ashley Federico. She's from Park Vista Community High School in Florida, and I'm going to give her a moment to tell us a little bit about herself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm an English teacher, high school, ninth and 10th grade, but I've taught everything from 6th to 10th. And in particular, I work with a range of students, but I definitely have ELL students within my regular ed classroom. And I'm so glad to share with you some of the techniques and strategies I've been using with them through NoRedInk, and I've seen work really well. So thanks again for being here, and I hope you find this useful.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. A little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. In your panel, you'll be able to see an area that's called questions. My colleague Anjali is also joining us, and so she will be monitoring that question box to be able to ask as we go through the webinar. You will see in our agenda that there will be areas where we pause, but definitely feel free to throw in a question as it comes whenever you're looking at the content. For today, we really are kind of putting it into two categories. The first one that we're going to dive into is going to be how Ashley uses the writing tools with her students. And then from there, we're going to be moving into how she's using the grammar assignments and the unit cycle to be able to help her ELL students grow. Whenever we wrap up, we will have an open Q&A. So if there is something that you were very eager to ask, maybe it doesn't connect to the content, but still want to ask, feel free to do that in that moment. So diving right in, I will go ahead and pass it over to Ashley. She'll be explaining what she does, and you'll see me navigating different areas of the site as she's going through and explaining her best practices.
Okay, so the best practices I found for writing in particular, on NoRedInk, they have a peer review and a self-review writing opportunity for students. A lot of our ELL students and lower learners need group work to kind of help them get through it. And I found that using the peer review and self-review, it can be very helpful for not only group work, but for our students who like to learn visually as well. So I start off with a self-review where they are going to highlight sections of the text and specify based on color what it is they're looking for. For example, thesis statement might be blue, whereas maybe a hook might be pink. And then from there, they can see through color, what it is, the organization of the text.
And so she definitely kind of alluded to that area of having this area to be able to start it off by projecting it, showing them how this works is really great, and giving them that preview before they dive right in. And of course, as you know, whenever you're going through the peer or the self-review, you are able to model answering the questions as well to give them that extra exposure before they dive in themselves.
The self-review is a great lead-in to the peer review. And now the peer review I find works extremely well with ELL students because they're getting instant feedback from you and from their classmates. So the peer review, they are able to review themselves and then 5 other anonymous students. So they're able to look at 5 other samples and give feedback to those students as well as receive feedback. Then they have an opportunity to revise their own writing. I have found this particular part of the program works very well, especially with the ELL students, because it gives them specific things to work on. And as you can see, it brings them through step by step. So submitting, rating, and revising, and they're able to kind of see it full circle. I will say though, with the ELL students, sometimes you need to be sitting in front of your computer to kind of catch them up, or offer a comment to them in particular. So I would suggest definitely having a Chromebook or laptop in front of you as you do this with your class.
Wonderful. And as you can see, here's just a sample of what that teacher dashboard looks like whenever you have a peer review in progress. As Ashley mentioned, you can see where each of the students are at in their process of submitting, rating, and revising. The other part to note here is that you can skip students along within any of these categories if you would wish. So if they have received and given an adequate amount of feedback, you can definitely move them forward to revising. And again, another little accommodation there.
Mm-hmm. The next thing in terms of writing tools would be the quick write. A lot of our ELL students, they're lacking in vocabulary. So using the quick write, you're able to set focus points, and you can kind of scaffold that throughout the year. So you might start with something very basic for your ELL students so that they comprehend what to do, and then you kind of tailor your focus points as the year progresses. So for example, you might say main idea, and then later you change that focus point to thesis statement so that they're used to the terminology. But the beautiful part of this quick write is that they can see those focus points as they write. And so you can say, okay, did you go back and look at all 5 of those focus points? And again, you can tailor those focus points to the terms that are going to be most helpful for your ELL students.
Yeah, I definitely love the ability to kind of begin with something that might be a little bit more concrete, as you mentioned, with main idea, and then as the year progresses, being able to build in more complex languages. I love that approach. I think it's a really great use of it. We're going to shift gears here in a bit and talk about a couple of other best practices that Ashley uses in conjunction with the writing tools, but definitely wanted to pause and see if there were any questions. If there are, feel free to type them in, and my colleague is going to let me know. And so as you're typing that in, definitely going to shift gears here and talk a little bit more about some other best practices that Ashley uses in conjunction with the writing tools.
So as many of us know, with a lot of these programs comes trial and error. And so I'm sharing with you today some of the things that I found work the best for me after a little trial and error. So the first thing is there is a lot of highlighting to be done on NoRedInk, which is very helpful, as I said before, with our ELL students and visually looking at a paragraph or an essay. But allow time for paper practice first. So I found that, and you can see it sample on your screen. This is actually from my class. I had the students go ahead and use different colors to highlight the different parts of a body paragraph. They did this, and then I checked it to be sure we were all on the same page. Once they've completed the paper practice, going then on to do the self-review and the peer review on NoRedInk, they are much more understanding of the assignments.
Wonderful. And we do have a question. I believe Matt asked, can you choose a text other than a peer text for the students to use to identify these statements and supporting details? In terms of, I might need a further explanation on this, but it sounds like you're asking if we can use a different tool other than the peer review. Oh, here we go. Can highlighting colors be changed to green, topic yellow, reason, examples, explanation to align to step up to writing? At the moment, the colors are set. So the colors that we use in the peer review are set to connect to whatever they're revising. So thesis is always blue, etc. So at the moment, no, they can't be changed, but they still offer that visual for them. Great question. Cool. Is there differentiated text to use within NoRedInk? I might have you elaborate a little bit more on that. I know that we are able to, like we said, scaffold with the focus points as well as potentially within the teaching. The words themselves that you'll see appear, such as for like self-review, those are set at the moment. That's a great question. Does NoRedInk offer stems and or sentence starters for beginning writers? We do not offer like a built-in sentence starter, but Ashley will be talking through a couple of areas, how she supplements within the classroom to help with that here in a bit. Great question. Great. And so again, best practice, as she mentioned, that paper process is very important for her ELLs in order to be able to then go into NoRedInk and use the scaffolding within the self-review to be able to analyze their draft. And so continuing on and taking a look at these other best practices that she does within her classroom with writing.
So I found that sometimes our students aren't quite grasping it, and a good best practice would be to display good examples. If you have a classroom projector, and every once in a while just pausing the class, displaying what would be considered a good example, and going over what makes it a good example. And then you can even leave it up there, freeze it on the projector for them to reference as they're working. I found that that works really well. The second thing, there is to check the assignment turn-in process. So I've gone through a lot of NoRedInk and the different programs, the strategies, the different things that they offer. Some of the assignments that you're going to encounter are going to have the students submit at the end, and that's what I want you to take a look at first. So some of the assignments, after they hit submit, they're all the way in. There's no redoing it. There's no revising it. It comes to you as the teacher. You grade it, and that's it. Whereas other assignments, after they're done submitting, you're able to push it back out to them and say, nope, try again, try again. So my suggestion to you would be check your assignments first before you assign them. Not just the assignment, but the turn-in process to the assignment.
Yep. And one of those that it's once they submit, it's gone is definitely like the quick writes. So keeping that in mind as you're going through it, and definitely using them, but just again, keeping in mind that once they submit, it's submitted, and it won't be returned to them for any feedback at that moment. Great point.
Okay, the next thing I found was in the peer review section, which, like I said before, is very, very successful with the ELL students. You're allowed to give anonymous comments as you grade those 5 papers we talked about earlier. But what I did notice was that a lot of my ELL students didn't really know what a good comment looked like. So I went ahead and screenshotted some of the comments that we eventually got to. But when I first started, a lot of the comments just said, good paragraph, good job. And I found that it wasn't actually offering any constructive criticism to the students as I thought it was going to. So I went ahead and I took a step back and I showed the students what a good comment looked like. And we practiced writing good comments to each other, and we practiced offering good comments verbally in class. And then once they got to this section of the peer review, the comments started being a little bit more specific, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there.
Yeah, I love the focus of teaching what a good comment was prior to it, because I've experienced it too. You know, they put good paragraph and somebody says it's a good comment, but at the same time, whenever you are using it in conjunction, as she was mentioning, you are able to see the comments that the students leave. And so within here, I can actually click view comments, and whenever they star a comment as a helpful comment, that will show up in this page. If I did want to make it anonymous, I can hide their names as well. And then this way they don't know who gave it, but still showing them what a strong comment looks like. And potentially even just having this projected can also help for them, or printing it out somehow. We're going to shift gears a little bit into the best practices that Ashley does when she's using the grammar side of everything and the mastery-based practice. Please do continue to type in questions as you get them. We are monitoring that question box, so continue to put them in. We'll pause for them once we have a good number of new ones.
Okay, so before my students dive into, highlighting and looking at a full essay and looking at even a full paragraph, a good start is the grammar side of NoRedInk. And because our ELLs, there's some of them are starting with very limited English, breaking it up into minute sections really helps them digest a little bit before moving on to something else. So my suggestion would be to start off the year with a diagnostic. So even though a lot of your students will say, well, they can't do it and they don't know it, it'll at least group them for you. And so you'll see exactly what it is they know and what it is that they're struggling with. Even if they're all struggling and below basic, at least you'll have the evidence right there in front of you.
Yeah. In addition to that, you can also see, as she was mentioning, even if it is very difficult or if they all are below basic, it will break down where they are at within the individual topics that you assigned in this diagnostic. So Trevor Turkey here, for example, I can see that they are definitely below basic on all of these topics. However, I can see that at the bottom, there's 33% on the identifying topic sentences and recognizing strong topic sentences. And so I know that that's going to be an area of much more need and much more individualized attention as opposed to the others, even though the others, of course, there will be direct instruction. The other area I wanted to quickly point out before we move into there is that, as she mentioned, it does group this for you. And so this is, again, just a really great tool in terms of just easing the differentiation aspect. So you can clearly see where they all lie. And like I mentioned, even if they all are below basic, you can still start to make groupings based off of areas of struggle within here.
Definitely. And as a classroom teacher, I know the grouping part of differentiation takes the longest sometimes. And for NoRedInk to just kind of have it right there for you, where you can save it or take a screenshot of it and then use that to place the students in different groups the following day or the following week, it saves a lot of time. So that moves me into number 2 there, grouping students based on mastery. Now I've done it a couple different ways where I've done all my below basic sitting with me, all my basics sitting together, all my proficient somewhere else, and then, sprinkling the advanced somewhere. And I've also done it I've tried it where I have one of each. So if you have an equal spread, you can do one advanced, one proficient, one basic, one below basic to kind of help that below basic pull them out and give them the help that they need. So I have tried it both ways and they both work. It really just depends on your own class and your own students and kind of what you're dealing with after they take that diagnostic.
Great, yeah, that's a great tip.
And then, as Diana said, you can actually go as specific as using the item analysis to identify trends within the question. So for example, if the entire class was getting question 3 wrong, you could ask yourself, well, what's going on with question 3 here? Or if the majority of students were getting question 6 wrong, you could pull that up and you could possibly break that right there into a whole group lesson. Because clearly if the majority is getting a certain question wrong, offering instruction to the whole group would make more sense than grouping them.
For sure. And just to give you a sense of how I got here, before I was in my assessment results class performance that gave me those groupings, if I just toggle over to item analysis, that's then going to give me that screen that Ashley was mentioning. And you can see very clearly here, for example, question number 2 was definitely something that we struggled with pretty significantly in this class. And I can go through and potentially pull those areas that, again, might need the most immediate attention. Great tip.
And what's kind of cool with that is if you do the diagnostic at the beginning of the year and then as a pre-test, and then you go ahead and do another one later in the year as a post-test, you can then look at those trends as well.
Yep. And so kind of along those lines, I'm going to go back to my assignments page here to show you what that can look like. And so you can see here that we have that unit diagnostic started off at the top. And we created a growth quiz that is connected to it, meaning that it's going to test them on the same topics as they were originally tested on. If I click on results here, you can see a similar breakdown as to what you saw in the first diagnostic. Big difference here is that it's going to show you all of these class trends within where they started. So I can see that my class started at a 63% and moved over to 76%. But even more granular, you can see individually where a student began based off of their color coding here on the left and where they ended based off of the color coding on the right and how many points they grew. So this is that, that pre and post test that Ashley's mentioning. Anything else to add here, Ashley?
No, I think you've got it.
Great.
The fourth point there on that best practices screen though is kind of one of my favorites because it makes the students feel really happy and proud, and you can kind of see it. So as your students start kind of getting a concept, what I like to do for differentiation is if I have a couple people sitting in the advanced category, I like to kind of make them feel special by they're the expert in the class. So sometimes I'll have them wear like a little badge that says expert, and they're allowed to move throughout the class and help students as they need it. And so they're kind of the classroom expert in that category. And it does really work, and it makes them all want to be the expert for the next time. No matter what age. I've done it with 6th graders and I've done it with 9th graders, and they all take pride in being the expert. And also that helps those ELL students because they need that little I'm proud of you moment.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of those areas that you could see at the beginning when I went to that original diagnostic is that we did have quite a few students that just from the get-go were advanced or proficient, et cetera, and those would be really great candidates. And as Ashley mentioned, kids just love it whenever they get to be praised that way, and they need it. It's really important. Along those lines, one of the areas that really excites me and I love talking about in trainings, whenever you do that growth quiz or that post test, there's students that maybe aren't completely in proficient or advanced, but they have grown a significant amount. And so you can see here, somebody like Olivia Otter, for example, who went from below basic to basic, still might need some work on those skills. So this is probably something I'm going to spiral in later on, but she grew 40 points, and that definitely is cause for celebration and for recognition. Again, just kind of keeping that in mind, how much they really enjoy it and how much they need that praise, especially for ELL students as they're moving forward. They have to make so many large jumps throughout the year that it's important to keep that praise coming when it's there.
Definitely.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, and so kind of going through a little bit of a couple of other areas, we're going to transition into some more just general tips for differentiation, and I'm going to let Ashley take it away.
Okay, so again, trial and error as a classroom teacher. Here are the 6 things that I found work pretty well. So tip number 1, I would definitely allow more time than you think it's going to take. So when I first started using NoRedInk, I would assign a grammar practice, and they give an estimated time frame. So every time you assign, let's say, parallel structure or subject verb agreement or whatever, you're going to see estimated time 20 to 25 minutes or estimated time 40 minutes. And that's great as an estimate. However, with our ELL students, I would almost, consider an extra, double that and allow for homework because it takes longer than you think. So definitely check that estimated time, but don't rely on it, I would say.
For sure.
Number 2, try self-review before peer review. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The first time I did it, I went ahead and did peer review first, jumping right in, gung-ho, and realized I needed to take a step back. Do the self-review, do the paper first, really, the hard copy on their desk, and then do the self-review, and then do the peer review. It seems to scaffold much better, and they really understand what to do after looking at their own writing and reflecting on their own writing.
Ashley, can you give us an example of how that made it easier? So like a comparison of when you dove into the peer review and
Yeah,
then
well, the first time I dove into the peer review, it was because I looked at it and I fell in love with it. And I was like, this can work. So the kids took a writing diagnostic, and, and then I just said, all right, we're all going to look at this. And basically half the kids had their hands up. Well, I don't understand what to do. You know, and I realized as I was running around the room like a chicken with my head cut off, that I needed to take a step back. So I went back into NoRedInk and I saw that there was a self review, and thinking to
Mhm.
myself, well, that makes a little bit more sense. I pulled that up and then we looked at that together, what that looked like on the overhead, on the projector rather. And then the next time we did it, it worked a lot better because they understood it a little bit better.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The third thing that I found very useful, our ELL students, they struggle with vocabulary, as I mentioned before. Not just the ELL students, but many students in general. So I provided them with kind of like a cheat sheet. So the first thing you see on the bottom right-hand corner is kind of like the scaled down version of where to start in terms of the cheat sheet. So fill in the blank to these sentence starters to make an introduction. So imagine a time when would be their hook. Then introducing the authors would be their bridge. And then the three big ideas are really their thesis statement. But because they have a hard time getting started, I went ahead and used the fill in the blank method, and it worked because the students weren't saying, well, I don't know how to start and I can't think of a way. Can you check this? And it helped things flow a little bit easier. And then right above that, that's something I had projected on my screen. NoRedInk, some of the terms that NoRedInk uses are not exactly the terms that I use in my classroom. So for example, I use the term general statement to start them off. NoRedInk uses the term hook or attention grabber. And while all of them are really synonymous, a lot of the ELL students, they hear something and they say, oh, that's not it. So, oh, you said general statement and I don't see it there. So I went
Mhm.
ahead and I just put synonyms up on the projector, which kind of correlate with what to put first in an introduction, what to put second, and what to put third. And I just kept it up there for the whole class period for them to reference.
Yeah, I really particularly love that. I mean, as a former ELL teacher, I had a ton of anchor charts everywhere for my kiddos. And so it's definitely something that resonates with me. And also one of those areas of, just really helping them along with the tool with the tool of NoRedInk, but just ensuring that they have that scaffolded support elsewhere within the room or even within their binder to help.
Yeah, and in fact, now thinking about that, I guess I could have, printed it out. They could have even put it on their desks, given them
Mm-hmm.
each a copy or something like that. But it's useful tip.
Hmm. For sure.
Number four, allow for mistakes and check for growth. So it sounds obvious, but our ELL students, a lot of times they want to make it perfect, and so they're constantly asking me, well, can I have extra time? I mean, I just think I made a mistake here, and I'm constantly reassuring them that it's okay to make a mistake. I want to see what you can produce, and then the whole idea here is growth. So just like we
Hmm.
were talking about with the diagnostic tool, you don't necessarily want all your, I mean, of course you want them to be in advanced, but that's not realistic. But to see that Olivia Otter went up 40 points, that's grit.
Hmm.
So, you might even give an award in your class for grit, for working hard, for making jumps. Just because you're not advanced, that doesn't mean you're not growing. And I always point that out, especially to the ELL students, because they're always feeling they're behind everyone else. But when they can see their growth, it's that aha moment for them.
Hmm. For sure. I think it's also one of those areas where, in terms of growth, definitely in the growth quiz, it's so clear here. But also, whenever you're looking at their writing, if you can look at their different drafts within guided drafts, which is something that we released, as well as being able to see their changes in self-review,
Yeah.
that's something that's so important for them to see that, even though it might be difficult to get through, we are recognizing their growth here.
Mhm.
Great.
Number five, we talked about a little bit before, but using that diagnostic and growth, it's huge. And NoRedInk has it set up pretty flawlessly where the diagnostic and the growth quiz, they're all right there for you to click on to assign.
Mhm.
Um, and at first I thought it was going to be very difficult because I was used to the old school, here's a paper copy of a pretest, here's a paper copy of a post-test, here's a comparison. And so I was a little nervous about trying it on NoRedInk, but the way that it's organized, it's very simple. It's a simple flow.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And one of the areas that we tried to make very simple is to continue that unit, as we were just talking. So um, the flow of it all, you can see that you saw this unit diagnostic when I started. This continue unit button allows you to keep everything connected and keep it flowing without having to every single time reassign the same topics and like flip between like is this the same topic that I assigned here? And so it really allows that consistency throughout.
The last tip I have there is it's very important to start with something that the students can digest a little bit. And if you throw an essay at them, they become overwhelmed. Even a paragraph, they become overwhelmed. But if you start with something very digestible, for example, if you want to start with identifying, verbs or something, then you assign a grammar practice based on that. So what I would do in class is I would do a warm up for about a week on one grammar concept. And
Mhm.
throughout the whole week, they would work on it a little bit at home for homework on NoRedInk. And at the end of a couple week period, they'd have a quiz or a test or whatever, just to show that they understand it. But what I did notice was breaking it up into little digestible bites. Even though as a teacher, we're trying to race through things and constantly get through our material, slowing down really helps in the long run, especially with our ELL students.
For sure. Um, Great. And so we do have a couple of questions for you, Ashley, that came in. And so one of them that came in was if you do quick writes as a sponge activity at the beginning of a class period.
Yes, I have. I have before. It works. It's great. The kids grab a laptop and they get right onto a quick write. And the great part about that is what I started doing is they have prompts already loaded into NoRedInk.
So
So
that's such a great segue. There is another one, a second question of how do you choose topics for quick writes?
sometimes, to be honest, I use their prompt ideas, but I don't know, each state has different, requirements. We have 4 state district assessments for writing, and I use, each time we have one, I go ahead and I plug that prompt in as well. So
Mhm.
most, if I'm going to use it as a quick write warm up, I'll use the pre-program prompts. But if I'm going to use it more of a learning tool based on their in-class stuff, I'll go ahead and just type in the prompt that they had from the district.
Wonderful. That's a great dual way of seeing the use of it. One of the other questions that we had come in were, do you do peer review for quick writes?
No, so peer review takes some time. And for me, we have block periods, so I would set aside almost a full block period for a peer review.
Mhm.
If they're doing it correctly and if they're really taking their time with it, it takes some time because, like I said, they first evaluate themselves, then
Mhm.
they go ahead and they look at 5 other students. And some of that is a waiting process because you have to wait for somebody to review yours. And you'll see you've got to do 5. So, and then they get their own copy back to make revisions before submitting to me. And what I do is I sit at my computer and as it comes to me, I'll grade it instantly and give them
Mhm.
feedback and then have them redo it if they've messed up somewhere. So it takes some time.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of looking at that screen that we're talking about where you have that ability to do so. So here in submission and grades, Ashley, this is what you were referring to, right? That they submit and then you grade it on
Yes.
the spot. Yeah. So you're able to toggle between the progress, which is showing you where every student is at, and then the submission and grades where you can do that.
Yeah.
Here. Great. Another question we had, what have your results been on the Florida ELD test?
The Florida what test?
ELD test?
Oh, well, I'm not part of that process. I just get the
Mhm.
kids ready for the writing, FSA. So that another teacher handles that. I couldn't really answer to that.
Yeah, makes sense. Great. Keep the questions coming. If there are any other questions, feel free to start typing them in. This is kind of that time where, after seeing all the best practices of the writing tools, how Ashley uses the grammar tools as well, and some of the tips for differentiation, definitely want to open the panel up to see if there's any other questions that might be still around. And we're teachers, so we have really great wait times.
And just one thing to add while you're thinking of those questions, don't be overwhelmed by the program. There's a lot to offer on NoRedInk when it comes to writing and grammar, but it's so useful. And just dive in and start somewhere would be my suggestion.
For sure. And we're always around to help. So, as we're starting to wrap up here, whenever you are going in and potentially trying some of these new tips and tricks that Ashley has shared, if you ever do need to reach out to us, feel free to click on this help and info button right here at the top. This is going to take us to the resource center that we have. A couple of things that can be done here. You can start looking for specific help desk articles. So if I start looking for let's say writing plans or anything like that, it'll show me a list. But more importantly, you can also click contact us and this will create a help desk ticket for you. Feel free to, again, like I said, dive in, don't be scared of it. And if you do need any help, we are just a click away. Great. It looks like we didn't have any more questions come in, so we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so, so much for being here after school, probably, and thank you so much for your engagement. If you do have any questions, like I said, do feel free to use that help button. We are more than happy to help. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.